all the way from Grenfell campus, assistant professor with business administration, Ryan Murphy.
Thanks, Jonathan. So today I'm going to try to pack a lot in. There's a lot here, probably too much. I apologize if I'm going to be a little bit blistering, but I wanted to do a few different things. And I've got a few different outcomes for you. So I'm just going to, because of that, because I'm trying to pack so much in, I'm going to dive right into it. So there's a few outcomes that I want to come from this. I want to give you sort of a picture of what I understand is the state of the art in generative tech for synthesis. That is, how do we use AI to create stuff? I'm going to walk you through a little bit of some prior work I did on the futures of AI in academia. I realize my head is in the way here, so feel free to yell at me if I'm too big-headed. I'm going to do a little bit of prior work on, or present a little bit of prior work on the futures of AI in academia. I'm going to share what was almost a surprise necessity that showed up for me as I prepared for this in the form of a novel approach to generative tech supported literature review. I realized late that I wanted to, really make sure that all the questions I had weren't explicitly and obviously answered by the literature, but I didn't have a lot of time. So I used generative tech AI tools in order to help with that, and I think you'll find that approach very interesting. The third is sort of the crux of this whole presentation. It's what I call the three realities of assessing and evaluating students in an age of AI. What does it mean to be in this age, and what do we have to do about it? The fifth is sort of the practical takeaway. It's a spectrum of approaches for assessing with and against AI, and I'm going to need your help in thinking about that. And speaking of help, the last point there is collaborators. One of the things that I'm hoping will come from this is if folks are interested in this topic and they're getting something out of it and they're interested in supporting it, I invite people to reach out to me directly. I'll pop my email in the chat right now. Why not? If you want to reach out to me to work with me on this stuff, because I think there's some exciting and unfilled sort of space in scholarship and in practice in terms of how we approach evaluation and assessment in AI, and I think everybody has a voice to sort of contribute to that. So with that, let's dive right in. As Jonathan said, I'm open to questions, especially if I'm not explaining something properly. Feel free to sort of put up your hand or ask a question in the chat, and I'll try to address it dynamically. But then I'll also pause it a couple times during the presentation if you have any brief questions before we get to a participatory element there at the end. So let's jump in. What are these things? How do they work? And I think the best way of understanding how exactly generative tech works is through how they make mistakes sometimes, is through seeing how they make mistakes. So, but before we get there, let's look at some language. These things are called many different names. But most commonly is AI, which I chagrin greatly because if you work with them closely, you'll realize that they're very much not intelligent. They need your help. And I don't think it's a great example of intelligence. We'll see the example that I'm going to show you in a second from about a year ago from ChatGPT 4. But they appear to be intelligent, but often if you really look at the details, they are not. And yet that's the popular term, so that's what we use. Sometimes they're called large language models or chatbots. They are based on machine learning, so you see that term thrown around, or neural networks. And they use a fundamental technology called generative pre-trained transformers or transformers. So you'll see all these languages, sort of all this jargon tossed around. What I like and what I adopt is the idea of generative tech. And so I think the key sort of thing that all these technologies do is they take some prompt that you give them or some prompt given to them by another service or application, and they generate something from it. And that's kind of unique in the world of technology because that generation is it's quite synthetic. Never before have we had technology that could really dynamically generate something interesting that was truly sort of unexpected. And so that's really what's unique about what these technologies can generate. So I use generative tech mostly as I talk about these tools. So here's an example of what of where it goes way off. And so there was a Twitter user who posted this about a year ago. He says, 4 prompts demonstrating that ChatGPT or GPT-4 is unable to correctly repeat or reason about the string DavidJL, which is the name of a YouTube user. So he asks, repeat the string DavidJL, and I'll pump that up. And it just says JNDL, like it completely messed it up. He asks how many letters are in the username. And then for some reason it says JDNL contains 4 letters, and it's not at all accurate. Are the strings JDL and DavidJL identical? And then it just totally sort of gets confused with what that question was. And then there's a last question, what's the deal with DavidJL? And it says, that's an ambiguous acronym, but it's not even referring to the right acronym. And it says, oh, that might mean the Jewish Defense League. Like, it just has no idea what this person is asking. And the reason why this error is occurring, this like complete misunderstanding on the part of GPT-4, which again, I remind you, is supposed to be sort of one of the most advanced models we have, is because these tools are generators, and they come from training text on the internet. So they're probabilistic producers of strings of text. They are seeded with a little bit of randomness, and depending on the tools you can control how much randomness to add. But they're ultimately just trained on text, and typically on huge corpuses of text from the internet. And so sometimes they get very confused. Another example of this is there was another kind of prompt you could ask, and I forget the exact details, but you could ask it about a number, and it would repeat some random number afterwards. And it was because there's this huge subreddit. If you're familiar with Reddit, it's a huge community of communities. There was a huge subcommunity that focused on just counting numbers. This is what people do for fun. I don't understand it. I can't speak to it. But somebody would post a number, and then replies would come in that count the next number over and over and over again. So there's tons of text, tons of tokens, tons of text on this subreddit. And ChatGPT was trained on all of this stuff. And so you could get it to sort of regurgitate random numbers by asking it completely inane prompts. So sometimes this stuff really makes no sense. And again, this is why I want to impress upon you that it's not necessarily intelligent. It is generative, but it's not necessarily intelligent. But there's one key sort of caveat, one new advancement that has started to become popular in the past maybe 6 months to a year, and that is that it isn't necessarily trained on the internet anymore. And so we're starting to see the advent of retrieval augmented generation, or RAGs. Maybe folks in the audience have heard of these. If not, I'm going to give you a little bit of an example of what it looks like. One thing that came out, I think 2 weeks ago, that caught many people's attention is if you're using Adobe Acrobat, the PDF sort of fundamental PDF application. Adobe integrated the ability to ask PDFs questions in that tool. And so that's an example of retrieval augmented generation. And so it basically takes a model that was trained, GPT-4 or what have you, trained on corpuses of text on the internet, so it kind of understands how text should relate to other pieces of text. And then it takes that understanding and it says, okay, consider only this piece of text that I'm looking at and answer questions. So I'll be using that in a moment and demonstrating what that looks like. But this is just a very brief introduction. If you've never heard of AI or generative technology or anything like that, I wanted to give you a sort of sense of how these tools are not necessarily that intelligent, but you're going to see in a moment how they can be used effectively. So I'm going to switch gears for a moment. I mentioned earlier that I was going to introduce some prior work that I did on the futures of AI in academia. This was from about a year ago. If you were in the faculty business and attended this workshop, I apologize because you'll have seen these before, but I think it's worth reiterating some of this stuff, even if you've seen it before. Basically, this is work that I did in strategic foresight. I used an environmental scanning approach, and the arc of it looks like the right here. So I scanned the world for events and signals for a few months, basically news headlines and things that were happening in discourses that were focused on AI and so on, and captured those signals and sort of collected them over time until they were able to be brought together in a set of trends or drivers of change. So this says basically, given that we're seeing these headlines over and over and over and over again, well, this suggests that there's a trend towards this direction, right? So an obvious trend or even driver is that we saw the advent of generative pre-trained transformers, GPTs, and that led to the ability to do this kind of generative text. That's a major driver, right? But what's more interesting in foresight work is the uncertainties of the world. So in addition to revealing trends and drivers, this work tends to reveal uncertainties. Basically, big questions about, well, is the world going to unfold this way or that way? And so I'll get into a couple of critical uncertainties in a moment that lead to 4 different scenarios for AI in academia. But before I get there, let me walk you through some of the trends that I found. Maybe they'll seem resonant with you, maybe not. But one of them is the effective use of generative AI to improve productivity. So we started to see some evidence, some actual evidence that use of AI in, say, industry, say customer service supports, for instance, saw real raw increases in productivity. So this reads, customer support agents using an AI tool to guide their conversations saw a nearly 14% increase. And in particular, lowest skilled and least experienced workers saw a 35% improvement. So we're seeing, and this again is old stuff, this is from June 2023, that's ages ago now, but there is a clear impact and a clear benefit to using these tools in the right way, in the right setups, with the right tools. So that's one. Another trend is the displacement of both emotional and knowledge work by chatbots. There was this wild headline that an eating disorder headline or helpline had replaced human staff with an AI chatbot. Not necessarily advocating for this. I don't think that sounds like a good idea by any stretch, but we are certainly seeing organizations try to find ways of replacing what would have been traditionally the role of a knowledge worker, somebody who might be a graduate from university, with models, right? With these kinds of tools. So this is another trend. A third one, and this is perhaps the most interesting for me as a management information systems scholar, is the growth of the AI learning curve. And so what this means is basically the more that sort of happens in AI, the more any individual might benefit from learning how to use these tools. And so the example here is a guide to prompt engineering. And prompt crafting or prompt engineering is the new practice of learning how to talk to these machines. And it turns out that there's some real gotchas, the real practice to figuring out how to talk to these machines. For instance, a while ago, there was a kind of demonstration where these machines were terrible at doing math. You could ask it what is 2 plus 2, and it would generate sort of the wrong answer half the time because, again, it really only understood, at least at the time, text. But if you said, get the answer exactly right, what is 2 plus 2, and then get the answer exactly right, and that was the full prompt, so you actually said get the answer precisely right and get the answer precisely right at the beginning and at the end, it would almost guarantee that it would give you the right answer. Which, I mean, who knows exactly what is happening there? The truth is that we don't necessarily deeply understand why that worked, but the point is that the way in which you ask these machines questions can greatly change the ways in which they're able to synthesize output for you to make you more productive or more effective. And so another example of that is the growth or the development of prompt marketplaces. And these are two real websites where you can go online and buy prompts for things, or at least learn maybe some prompts that are more useful for whatever purpose you're trying to do. This is particularly useful in visual generative tech, so generative tech that's creating graphics or icons or what have you, but it's also present in text-based generative tech. But the point is that there's clearly a skill here, and there's clearly something that people are able to get good at and then demonstrate and sell. So that's prompt marketplaces, and that trend is the growth of the AI tool learning curve. One other trend, I think this is where it stops, is the growing utility of scoped chatbots. And so this is again related to the concept of retrieval augmented generation, but the idea here is that you have folks who train their train models on their own notes, and on the right here is a video of that, where somebody has taken a model, trained it on their 20,000 notes that they've got on their computer that they have written, and they can then ask that model questions and get accurate answers on what they ate on December the 30th, 2022, or when their mom's birthday is. Another example is somebody who trained a model completely on their favorite podcast, and they were able to then ask the model specific questions about the podcast. So scoping these things and working with them in order to make them more useful for specific purposes is another trend that's really important. So that is a set of trends, hopefully indicating sort of the prevalence of these tools, how important they're becoming. And two not so clear trends, two critical uncertainties were the following. One was whether or not AI would be significantly appreciated and rewarded, and that's here on the right, or whether it would be unacceptable and viciously punished. And so this is the acceptability critical uncertainty. Do we accept these tools as part of our lives, or do we hate them? And what does that look like? The second critical uncertainty is whether or not these tools become completely ubiquitous and easy to use, or if that learning curve really becomes crucial and they therefore become exclusive and difficult to take advantage of. And that is the exclusivity critical uncertainty. And this leaves us, when you put these two critical uncertainties against each other, a classic approach to developing scenarios in foresight work is to do that in order to produce 4 scenarios. And so at the intersection of each of the polarities on these two critical uncertainties are a set of scenarios that I find really interesting. In the upper right, we have a world where we have AI experts. And that's a world in which AI is acceptable, we kind of like it, but it's hard to use it really well. And therefore, there's a need for AI experts. There's a need for people who are AI whisperers. And that would mean, for instance, that universities might be graduating students who are experts at, say, microbiology AI tools. Maybe there's minors in those kinds of programs, or in that kind of a topic. In the upper left, we have a world in which AI is exclusive and difficult to take advantage of. Maybe it becomes completely illegal because of the legal context. If you've looked at headlines lately, you'll note that major model generators, OpenAI and so on, are being sued because they kind of sort of stole a bunch of stuff from, say, the New York Times or the Financial Times. And so there's a chance that some of those pressures are going to cause these companies to kind of collapse. And yet the genie's out of the bottle. A lot of these tools are open source and can be downloaded and sort of used on your own. And in fact, I have played with local AI models on my computer, and they are functional. And so therefore, there's might be a world in which these tools disappear from the sort of public eye. They're not so easy to get at, but they still can be used, and it becomes kind of like exchanging homework on the internet, right? Or exchanging past assignments on the internet. You can find a model on operations management that will help you answer all of the homework because it's been trained on the popular textbooks or what have you. So that's the bootleg AI scenario. In the bottom right, we have a scenario in which AI is simply everywhere. It is easy to use, it is ubiquitous, and it's appreciated and rewarded. And so this is a world in which AI is kind of meh. It's like everybody's got it, everybody's using it all the time. And so we just have to live with it and learn how to live with it. And the bottom left is a world in which AI is ubiquitous and easy to use, but it's unacceptable. And so it's kind of a joke. And so you'll see comments like, even if you submit a paper to an instructor and you wrote it yourself, the instructor might say, this looks like it was written by an AI, as a joke, as a way of saying this is terrible work because AI produces terrible work in this scenario. So these are 4 possible scenarios. Scenarios are not meant to describe the world that might occur, that is a prediction. They're meant to be descriptive. And so thinking about these different worlds helps us think about all the different worlds in which we would like to live in, what we would like to work in, and the ones we want to avoid. And so that's the point. It's not to say we're going to go in one of these 4 scenarios. It's to say we're probably going to be somewhere in the middle. And so what is it that we, somewhere in the middle, and what is it that we want to do about that? So that leaves us with a kind of research question. Given any of these worlds, how should educators be designing and evaluating assessments in an age of generative AI? And that's the research question that I sort of came into this presentation with, that I proposed this presentation with. So I'll take a break for a second. I'll entertain sort of critical uncertainties in the audience for a moment. Yeah, or shall I just charge on, keep going? Okay, I'm going to charge on. We're invested, or we're bored out of our skulls. We'll see. So I mentioned before that as I was preparing for this workshop, I kind of reached a point a couple of days ago where I was like, gee, I haven't really looked at what other people have said about this stuff. I've been thinking about it a lot myself, but I'm a scholar. I'm supposed to read my colleagues' work. What should I do about that? I don't have a lot of time. I can either show up in front of this lovely audience and sort of play fool and try to not talk about what everybody else has done, or maybe there's a way of using generative tech to help me escape from that sort of appearance and demonstrate the tools at the same time. And so I came up with an approach, a methodology to do a rapid literature review with the support of generative tech. And so the question is, I only had a couple days. How do I rapidly review prior work? And I came up with this possible methodology. And so it's inspired by, I'm sure you've heard of systematic literature reviews, which are designed to be extremely thorough and reproducible and be an intense effort, usually taking months to years. Another type of literature review is a scoping review, and a scoping review is not necessarily focused on being reproducible. It's meant to be more quick, but it's still going to take a lot of work to do a good scoping review. I didn't have that much time, so I came up with a layer before scoping review. And the idea is to use generative tech to do a rapid, limited review of prior work. And so I call it limited synthesis of a domain, or LSD. Research. So the way in which we develop an LSD is as follows. First of all, you want to develop a research question. We already have that. How should educators be designing and evaluating assessments in an age of generative tech? Okay. So let's do a literature search based on that. And just like many other kinds of literature reviews, I took off on Google Scholar in one search, and I searched for the following sort of Boolean phrases: generative AI assessments, generative AI evaluations, generative AI exams, generative AI assignments, and found 52 different papers since 2023. This is a rapidly evolving world, but again, given the sort of rapid scope of what I was trying to do, rapid and limited scope of what I was trying to do, I tried to be very quick. So then I did an inclusion screening, reviewing the abstracts and the titles. Does this paper actually address the research question? Is it of sufficient quality based on sort of, is it like a blog post or something, or is it an actual attempt at answering these questions? And I ended up with a list of 45 papers. And then I don't have a lot of time to get into this, but I developed a standardized prompt to use to analyze every single one of these papers. And that prompt basically asks for, or tells the model, a given context or role, you're an academic researcher focusing on this topic. Your task is to analyze this paper, and I'll explain that in a moment, this paper, and to look for a few different specific things. So judge its quality, look at its contributions, and ask, are those contributions relevant to the research question? And are they significant in the scope of things? And then finally, and this is key, provide some evidence, provide direct quotes from the work in order to evidence your claims, your ideas on why this piece of work is a good contribution to this research question, or why it's significant. And so you can actually state to these models, and this is, by the way, a retrieval augmented generator. You can state, please give me an exact quote and a page number, and then that gives you the ability to validate its conclusions, to go back and say, oh yes, this person actually does, well, I'll give an example in a second, but yes, this person or this author actually did write this thing, and it does lead to this conclusion. And so that's the standardized prompt. And then I ran that prompt on all 45 papers using, it wasn't Adobe Acrobat, but basically could have been, using a PDF chat model. And it resulted in analysis like this one. And I realize this is too much text, but I'll just point out the bolded part here. It says, by advocating for assessments that emphasize critical thinking, creativity, and ethical considerations, the paper offers a roadmap for educators to navigate the challenges posed by AI tools. Quote, an increased focus on how to most effectively develop those underlying capacities is needed. So this was a paper titled, How Do We Change Teaching and Assessment in Response to Increasingly Powerful Generative Artificial Intelligence, from Bauer and colleagues from 2024. So I got 50 or 45 different tables, rows of tables like this. And then I analyzed that really quickly and came up with these remaining research questions. Out of all of those papers, it seemed that there was a few sort of gaps that still remained. Obviously, there's a lot of these things that aren't quite understood yet. So how do we effectively integrate AI in assessment? How do we engage students in AI while doing assessments? How do we as institutions rapidly adapt to technological change? How do we balance the use of AI with the skill development that's necessary, that we don't want students to supplant their skill development with the use of generative tools? What are the ethical considerations here? And how do we detect and prevent AI misuse? And so I was happy because this top one is the key one that I was interested in. How do we do assessment in an age of AI? And so the results of my LSD, was that this research question seems to be still unresolved, and therefore I can perhaps do something here. And so a few observations before I go on to actually talking about that takeaway in this process was a few observations on this process, because it was really interesting. For one, the token output size, how much you allow the model to sort of spit out in response to a prompt, could probably really change the conclusions it's able to draw. If it only has, say, 1,000 tokens, which roughly translates to maybe 1,400 words, it might not come up with as elegant synthesis as it would if it had 2,500 tokens or 4,000 tokens. And so as you increase tokens, the model takes longer to output what it's synthesizing, and it costs more. But I just started with the default one, and it seemed to be relatively robust, but I would like to, in the future, play with the token size and see how much it changes what they're able to output. These tokens, or these models, can't abstract, so there were papers that it deemed irrelevant and refused to analyze based on the prompt that I gave it, even though I could personally imagine how to sort of derive relevance from that paper. So let's say there was a paper on how using models helped students output more or less creative work. Obviously, that has input or implications for assessment, but the model refused to analyze it at all completely. It also sometimes ignored instructions, even when you say, please include quotes to evidence your work, it would just ignore them. And then sometimes you rerun the model or you rerun the prompt again, and it would output. So again, that's that probabilistic element of this. It takes some practice to figure out how to get it right. Interestingly, the cost of this, it took me about 4 hours to do this work, and it cost about $5 of OpenAI credit. So for the amount of effort, it was not a super substantial cost or a super substantial input. Another observation is that they can't review figures and diagrams. They're just not capable vision wise of taking in a graphic and actually comprehending that at all yet. Maybe they'll get there, but right now they are not. And interestingly, maybe we'll get to that. This is a trick that I use when I'm asking students to do submitted assignments. I say, please summarize this paper where there's a table or a figure that is super important. And the students that just plug it into a generator and then submit the output completely miss how significant the table was, and it's a real red flag. So this is a quick aside. And then finally, I asked the model to judge the quality of every single paper, and it said that every single paper was high quality, every single one. There was no real ability to judge there on the methodological sort of differences between each paper. And certainly maybe they all were good, but I wouldn't expect 45 papers to be equivalently good. And so there's an element there where I don't think these tools are good yet at judging quality. But what does that maybe mean for the future? And this is still an aside from the scope of the current presentation, but I do think that LSD and related techniques will become common. We might, as a result, see AI-friendly publications become the norm. Like, it might be a good thing if you are an author and you are trying to publish a paper, you might want to think about how that paper will be interpreted by an AI and not put all of the key contributions only in a table or a figure, which sounds really ridiculous. And yet, if you look at how the internet has changed in response to Google's search engine optimization pressures over the past 20 years, the internet is a completely different place, and it is completely and totally because of Google's monopoly and the pressures that places on websites for shaping how their content should look. So no doubt, if this becomes a really sort of important way of analyzing literature, then folks are going to need to anticipate how models are going to ingest their work and try to publish accordingly. And then the other piece is that it's not quite garbage in, garbage out. That's a phrase that's often used for this kind of, frankly, lazy synthesis that I did. But there's something more to it here. Sometimes, it's not garbage in because it's a pile of academic papers, and the AI is actually reviewing it, breaking it up into what we call embedded elements, and then understanding the relationship between those embedded elements in order to output some kind of synthesis. So it's not garbage in, and therefore it's not quite garbage out. There's something more going on here, but obviously the technique this is completely novel and proposal and sort of in proposal stages, and so the technique needs some validation. So nonetheless, there was a key sort of outcome for me, and that is that RAG-based text, retrieval augmented generation-based text, like the example that I just gave you a couple of slides ago of how it synthesized the work of Bowers et al., RAG-based text will be very difficult to catch, and it will produce reasonable work. People will be able to use these tools to synthesize literature like is so common in undergraduate assignments. And I won't be able to catch users submitting this in an assignment in my courses. It would be because the language does not look like some of the red flags that you might be getting used to seeing in some submissions that you've seen in your own sort of teaching and learning. And so I think this advent of RAGs and the commonality of these tools, it's showing up in Adobe Acrobat and being publicly available for a few bucks in different apps, is going to really change our ability to catch these tools. So this leads to two underpinnings. All of this work leads to two underpinnings for me. The first is that educators are losing this arms race. There is no winning the evaluation arms race. We are not going to be able to keep our old ways of assessing and evaluating students and just like try to find ways of catching students who are submitting generated work. I think it's impossible. I think we're going to lose. The second thing is that generative text skills will also be important in industry and academia. Like, we need to, given how useful these tools are, we actually need to be good at using them, both as researchers and teachers. And if you're going out in industry, if you're supporting, if you're working in customer service, like that example showed before. And the better we are at using them, the more value we're going to be able to produce from them. And so these two underpinnings combine, and they lead to one responsibility that we have as educators, as teachers and as learners. We have a responsibility to teach and evaluate both against and with generative technologies. And this leads to three realities. This is sort of the fundamental argument of this work. First is that policy is insufficient. We have been talking for months in institutions across the globe about whether or not we should allow or disallow or prevent or suspend or whatever AI tools in our classrooms and in our assignments. It's a fool's errand. We can say everything we can, but if we don't, if that's all we do, if we just put something in our syllabus and then assume that everybody's going to play along, it's not going to work. The second is that we, as instructors and as teachers and learners, we need to learn and teach how to use AI. These tools are going to be very, very important. They're going to be very powerful. They already are. And so we have a responsibility to figure that out. And then the third is that we must fundamentally rethink assessments and evaluations. And that is because policy is insufficient. If we're in a course, say, or if we've set up a course where we say you must not use generative technologies in this course, and then we provide students with a submitted paper assignment, I think students are going to use generative tech, and I don't think you're going to know if they've used generative tech. So I think it's a fool's errand, and therefore I think we need to fundamentally rethink how we're assessing and evaluating students. And so that leads to, I'm a fan of spectrums, clearly, of polls. I see a spectrum of how we assess AI with two poles. One is how we prevent. One is preventing the use of AI, so designing assessments that completely prevent the use of AI, and the other is designing assessments that actually promote and allow and support the use of AI, and maybe even require it. And along this spectrum, I see 6 different types of AI assessments. Yeah, 6 different types of assessments. The first of these is AI-proof assessments, and this is an assessment in which it is completely impossible, physically impossible, to use AI to complete the assignment. An example of that is an oral exam. You can't. Even if I guess I can imagine having a secret earbud stuck in my ear and sitting down to talk to a professor and having Siri try to help me with it. But it would be, if you've had any experience with voice assistants, you'll know that that would be more likely to mess you up than if you went in without it. Someday that won't be true, but I think you get the point anyway. So AI-proof assignments are where it's physically impossible to use AI to complete the assignment. AI inappropriate assignments are where the outputs that you can get from AI would be inappropriate formats for the submission. So let's say a presentation. You can ask students for a paper and a presentation, and the presentation part, the AI wouldn't be able to help you with. So a student certainly could use generative tech in order to help make the content, but they still need to actually deliver the presentation somehow, right? An AI-resistant assignment type is where over-reliance on AI will lead to bad performance. And your average paper is already here. If you've been assessing work in the classroom lately, you've probably seen assignments that are clearly generated by AI. Might be hard to prove, but it's pretty easy to mark them poorly because they tend to be bad quality. And so this is AI. This is the third type, AI-resistant assignments. The fourth is AI allowed. You can use AI in this assignment if you want. Probably won't have a major effect on your performance. So I'm not going to say any more about that. It's just what it is. The fifth is AI integrated. And so this is where instructors would set up assessments and evaluations that leverage AI by design. And so maybe you ask somebody, maybe you ask students to run an LSD, run a limited synthesis of a domain. And so the idea here is to try to help students start to practice AI skills in doing their assignments or assessments for your course. And then finally, AI required is a scenario or an assessment in which without AI use, performance will likely suffer. And so this is the hardest one I've had to come up with an example of what might be. In some ways, what we're talking about when we talk about possible assessments in these different types is a kind of reverse archaeology. We're talking about creating artifacts from a possible future in which this exists, because it doesn't necessarily exist yet. But as we'll see, the next moment of this presentation, I'm going to be asking you folks for ideas on what exactly this might look like. So that's the 6 types. And yeah, this is where I shift gears, and I was hoping to do a bit of a participatory experience in this workshop. If you're online, mute your mics before you're grown, but I'm hoping that we can try to collect some ideas here on what these different types might look like. I've given you a few examples so far, but you're all probably smarter than me, so I'm hoping that you can help populate a catalog of these. So the task here, if you'll work with me, is to choose one of these 6 types and to generate, as a joke, generate an assignment that fits the type. Include what students might have to do and how AI may or may not be used and the likely consequences of using it. And the way in which I was going to collect these is via a little interactive poll. So the idea here is for you to go in here, and it's a pretty simple prompt. It just asks you basically to do what I've already read out from the slide. You submit your ideas, and in a moment, I'll put up the screen that shows what people are submitting. So this is sort of where the presentation ends, and we can either engage in this for a few minutes and work with me, and I will kind of force that. I think I'll ask you to take a moment, to take 3 or 4 minutes, try to think of one of these, submit something to Slido, and then in 3 or 4 minutes we can look at the results and we can engage in questions and answers and discussion. I'd love to see and hear what folks are thinking about all this stuff. So let's do that. Let's set a timer for 3 minutes, and I'll disappear from the screen, but I'm still here listening, and we'll collect a few ideas. Thanks, folks, for your submissions so far. I'll, at this point, think, yeah, we can take questions and answers if folks have questions or questions and comments, sorry. Or if anybody wants to raise their hand and speak to something that they submitted here, that would be really neat. The idea that I had here is to sort of take these and see if there's a catalog that I can build out of them that sort of fits each type. And again, I can kind of imagine how a very useful output for educators would be able to look at these different types and say, what do I want to do? I want to prevent AI completely in this course. Okay, well then I need to use these kinds of assessments, and here's a catalog of ideas. So that's kind of the concept. And again, my email is there in the chat, or I'll put it up online. I realize you can't see it on the screen, sorry. I'll put it up right here real quick so you can write it down if you want. Murphy@mun.ca. I also could use my voice, I suppose. That's not a good idea. But I would welcome people reaching out, trying to help with this. So I'll put that up for a moment, just in case you want to catch it, and then I'll switch back over to the Slido. And again, taking questions, comments. Sorry, go ahead.
And I just want to say thank you very much. This was amazing. And I really appreciated being able to witness your, kind of step-by-step process. And I think this is a huge, I concur that if post-secondary in general doesn't step up, it's, they're going to be left behind, and it's not good.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Online, Anit has raised a hand.
Yes, hello, sorry. Just trying
Hi.
to get unmuted here.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. Yeah, Ryan, I just wanted to say thank you for this presentation. I think what you've reinforced is that we do need to accept that it's here to stay, and it's only going to get better and faster and stronger with time. And you've really empowered faculty to think about how to work along that continuum of complete permission to, or complete, promotion of AI to prevention of AI, and what that looks like in assessment. So just want to echo the previous speaker's comments that this is a great presentation. So thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, hi, Ryan. So just wanted to elaborate on what I wrote on this comment was a case wherein one of my fellow students was, not fellow students, fellow colleagues was asked to explain a point in their assignment, and they were unable to do that, and that was a clear indicator, right? And even in cases where this does not become successful, such kind of practices will lead to, students knowing that this particular instructor is asking, questions from their assignments, and this will avoid, people, using AI, or at least they'll not use it completely, or they just use it for supporting their assignment, not just completely using it for submission of their assignments. Right? So that can be like, so the instructor can, and probably some of the professors who have taught my courses, they have openly told that they know that they know when they read the content that this is not from you and it's from someplace else, and they might not be able to accuse the student directly, but they can certainly call them and ask that, what do you mean by this? Or, in such a practice, even if it does not, lead to a definite outcome, it will spread like wildfire, among students. And at least in the next assignment, it will not be totally like that. So I just mentioned that, or I just wanted to elaborate.
Mm-hmm. It's a really good point. What I could hear, sometimes the microphones get clipped off, unfortunately, a little bit, but what I understood was sometimes there are, one way of sort of dealing with this is to ask people about the process, right? Ask students about the process, or at least like bring them in after they've submitted something and ask them about that. And I think I've heard of assignments that combine that too, asking students not only to write a paper, but also articulate your approach to the paper, your little step-by-step in a kind of log. And even that is something that because of the way these models work with context, it's actually really tough to get them to both articulate a synthesis to describe, say, a topic of that you've asked them to do, and then to also describe a step-by-step to produce that. They don't actually have any metacognition, so they're not able to do that kind of thing. So it's a good catch. But the other piece of what you said, if I heard correctly, was that there's an element of this where catching, in addition to kind of developing assignments that acknowledge that AI exists and it's a thing now, we also need to develop our approaches to trying to catch plagiarism, because increasingly, if we bring folks in to ask them if they to accuse them of plagiarism based on a submission, well, for one, it can be so easily you can so easily catch a false positive and accuse somebody of something heinous when they haven't done it. And the second piece of it is it's impossible to prove these things most of the time. Even now, even if it's using the kind of obvious style and tone that ChatGPT does. And I've seen a number of assignments in which people have submitted, copied and pasted, and then failed to change the formatting. And so it's like literally exactly the formatting that ChatGPT has. So they're writing in like default Word formatting, and then all of a sudden it changes to ChatGPT's formatting. And outside of that, that's like the only real proof you can have of accusing somebody of plagiarism. That and reference checks. So the other protocol that I've seen and actually came up in that rapid literature search that I did is a protocol of checking the references. And it's always been important to check references, but even more so now. It's really easy to check if a bunch of references are hallucinated, made up. And if you do that and they're all fake, then that's a guaranteed way of catching a case of plagiarism.
Thank you very much for this amazing presentation. I have one comment and two questions, if my questions are repeated. I apologize for that. I think, as you mentioned, so it is inevitable in today's world. The students and also for instructors to use it. How to regulate it, so it is the big question. But for me, in the two previous semester that I'm a student at one. So one of the negative aspect or impact of using AI is that it, has a negative impact on the critical skills or critical thinking capacity of students. Because one of the expectation of going to university for undergraduate or graduate level is to enhance the capacity of students to think critically about different things. But AI, however, it facilitates something, At the same time, it has a very destructive impact on students. So it would have this impact, negative impact in the whole of generating knowledge in the future. So that's one of the question and comment and concern as well. So my question is there a particular software tool to equip the instructors to detect that to what extent the AI contributed in preparing an assignment of a student? Is it available for instructors at MON or not? Or is it available at all or not? The third question is, how about the legal and policy framework currently at MON? So if AI is inevitable, so it means that we have to regulate it. So because in some syllabus, so the instructors, ask the student, AI is not allowed, at all to use it. But in some other syllabus, some other instructors told us, okay, you can use AI, but we don't know to what extent it is allowed. So it means this is still a dilemma, so it's not answered by the instructors as well. How it is going on, the debate about regulating the AI, at least at MON. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. So I'll focus on the second two questions. The first of those two was, is there tools that we can use to detect plagiarism via AI? And there are certainly companies who claim that they are. I don't think it's worth going down that road at all. Even in the best case scenario, so first of all, those tools tend to have huge data implications. I'm very much against them as a management information systems scholar. Submitting student work to those databases is basically taking student work and then giving it to a for-profit company and saying, here, use this to make a bunch more profit. And there's also all kinds of other privacy implications with sending student work elsewhere without kind of their explicit consent. So there's that element, but then the second piece is that they're also bad at it. Again, all you need to do is, you could imagine a workflow where a student asks a model. So first of all, you ask an RAG that is completely trained on your own notes to speak in your own words and your own language and to generate synthesis based on these different PDFs that your instructor has assigned you. You're never going to catch that. No automated model is going to be, or no sort of automatic plagiarism detector is going to be able to pick up on that. And yet that is what students are already capable of today if they really wanted to, depending on their skill. So I think that chasing down turnitin.com or any other service claiming to be able to detect plagiarism via generative tech is just a waste of money and a pile of ethics violations that we are bad at navigating. I have strong opinions on that. The third point, or the third question, was about the regulation of it here at MON, the state of policy. I'm not an expert. There might even be members in the room on the Senate subcommittee on AI use. There is a subcommittee. I know it was struck within the last year. I know it recently announced some language that should be included in syllabi. But I think that's as far as we've gotten, is that instructors should certainly include a statement on how AI should be used in their course in every single syllabus. But I don't think this institution at least has gotten much further than that. So that's where we are.
Hi, Ryan. It's Jana Rosales, and I'm going to make a plug because Ryan's going to be featured as a panelist in another AI panel that we're going to host at the plenary session this afternoon. But picking up on and so part of that panel is actually going to try to collect people's feedback in terms of what else does the university need to do. So that's that question that you just addressed there. Well, what are we doing? We're going to address some of that as well. My question though is, this got my head spinning. It's hard enough for me to keep up with your presentation.
Sorry.
What's going on? Well, no, that was great. It's like just making my head spin. So what advice do you have for educators to try to clear the space and time to be able to bring ourselves up to speed in order to be able to handle this in an effective way? With what recommendations?
That's a tough question. You're asking the wrong person, because we're all cyborgs, but I'm a really good one. And so it's hard for me to give advice to folks who are maybe not so willing to be connected. But I think that is the phase shift that needs to happen, is that folks need to start to realize that in addition to learning you know, I don't know. I'm trying to come up with good examples. So a reference manager or other aspects of education technology, your Brightspace, in addition to actually having to learn the features of Brightspace and how to use, you know, assignments and surveys and intelligent agents and all the other things that Brightspace has, which I know most people don't have the time for. I think this is a new realm that they need to make time for. And I think maybe if I can be a little bit less glib about it, I think trying to use these tools in productive ways is going to be the carrot that gets people incentivized to actually do it. Because it's easy to look at the examples in the public discourse on AI from a year ago when there was really public cases of like lawyers getting disbarred because they just used ChatGPT to completely develop their submission to a judge, and the judge was like, this is plagiarized, and then now you don't have a law license anymore. I think a lot of those stories might have made people who paid a little bit of attention sort of fall into that trough of disillusionment, if you're familiar with the Gartner hype cycle. But the truth is that these tools have gotten a lot more advanced, and so those educators who might find themselves disillusioned with these tools should probably try to look at some of the more productive ways in which they're being used. I've only talked about synthesis today, the ability of these models to combine text and output text. But there's some really powerful applications, for instance, in asking these models to structure and organize data. And you can do some incredible things by giving these tools tables and saying, can you reorganize these tables? And oh my goodness, I've just saved hours of manual sort of Excel-based labor in trying to move these things around. So look up, you know, I don't have a reference, but look up resources on using models for this kind of work. And I think you'll find you'll learn about the tool, you'll learn about the technology and the philosophy behind it, and you'll save time and get better as a researcher and a teacher as a result.
Thanks, Brian. My name is Dennis Peters. I'm on the Senate Committee on Teaching and Learning, or I chair the Senate Committee on Teaching and Learning. I'm on the Senate Committee on AI. I'll just put in the answer the question, but also before that, I'll note that committee does have room for members, you know, to invite other people with expert knowledge to join. So you maybe get an invitation from me.
Sure.
To answer the question, so that committee has recommended calendar change language that's going to, I think it's going to Senate this time, or went last time. So it's being approved, going through the regulation change process. But as I totally agree with you that your bullet about policy change is insufficient. But we are not able to regulate the subsistence. We are not going to be able to you know, change the way or prevent it from being there. So we've got to respond to it. I will also put in a plug for the CITL page has some suggestions about syllabus language that you could use for various scenarios, you know, on the spectrum that you identify from not allowed to encourage or require. There's some suggestions in there. I'm not saying we've got it perfect. We've got to keep going on that and keep thinking about how this evolves, but that's where we are.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thanks.